Recording started.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. This is week 6, so chapter 7 from last week since we didn't get to it, and then chapter 8. Um, Again, I can see a few folks are out there, so if I'm not talking loud enough or need to adjust a microphone or something like that, let me know. I assume you can all hear me all right. Anyway, um, so like I said, week 6, and then so we'll be doing chapter 7 and then 7 and 8. I didn't have the other microphone on, so should be good now. What we're going to talk about here is the sources of credit and the cost of credit alternatives. I realize as we're going along, there's going to be a lot of material here. Don't fret too much next week. I'm going to have just a dedicated, session. I'll try and keep it at an hour, but it'll definitely be one you'll want to watch on YouTube or look at live. But I'm going to actually have a copy of the exam, the first exam, and I'll kind of go over the high points of it to make sure you kind of scope the material and the depth that you're going to need to pursue to get this done. I you know Personal finance can get really confusing because there's so many opinion based things and things that are not absolutes or at least have exceptions. If people say, well, you shouldn't ever invest in this, well, there may be cases certain times in the market where you do want to invest in that, or you do want to use credit cards, like I say, in certain situations. You don't do it blindly, you don't do it because you're forced into it, but there are certain times where it's advantageous to do some strange personal finance things. So anyway, to speak in absolutes and say this is always or never, that's kind of dangerous, and so it makes it a little harder in terms of tests when we're going to do multiple choice and true false. And anyway, don't worry, I'm completely aware that we need to kind of scope it down a little bit so you have a better handle on what's going on. I put the little practice test out there. Granted, it's only like 3 questions, but I just want to make sure people can at least find it and realize what you're up against. I have had a few people need to be reset. No big deal. If you happen to step away or look in a different browser or do something like that, the way the test is set up, it will just stop and then it'll lock you up and you'll get a 0 score. So that's why during the practice thing it's no harm no foul. But during the real test, again, it's not the end of the world if you get locked out. But if it happens a couple times, then it kind of whatever. It makes things look a little odd in terms of somebody googling answers and doing things that perhaps they shouldn't be. So anyway, we don't need any of that because you won't get locked out and you won't have any problems. Again, it'll be a 60-minute test, and we'll talk more about that next week. So anyway, moving on. Um, Analyzing the objectives, consumer credit, develop a plan to manage your debts, access the choices, and declaring personal bankruptcy if things go horribly wrong. So we talked a little bit about this in terms of in other aspects, consumer credits. Obviously, if parents, family members are willing to do that, and you can't, you don't trash those relationships, that is a good way to go, especially when you're starting out, because interest rates are basically based on collateral. If you've got something like a home or something, interest rates are very very cheap because they know they can take that home. And likewise, even car loans a lot of times are inexpensive because they have some exceptional rights that the lender does to just come and take that car back, and also get the rest of the money out of it because you're probably upside down. Cars depreciate so fast it's hard not to be. So, and then you can also do the loans from the government ones. Those are an interesting thing. Then we'll talk more about it. In terms of bankruptcy, people think that they can go bankrupt and get away from their student loans. No, won't happen. So that is a kind of a nasty exception that is going to be pretty relevant to a lot of folks who tend to take out a lot of a lot of student loans. You don't escape those. Those are not discharged in bankruptcy. Okay, so medium price loans. Now we're getting into banks, things like that, credit unions. This is, by necessity what you have to do. But again, you have, some flexibility. If interest rates are running away, you may not want to do it. Right now, interest rates are pretty cheap. So, you may want to do it. And again, it's part of your life. Things you got to do in order to get by. I mean, you need a house, you need a car, you need things like that. It takes money to make money. You can't anyway. You can't normally get by without getting involved in that. What you want to stay away from though are these expensive loans. Finance and check cashing, credit cards, just straight credit cards, or even store credit cards. Unless you can comply with the details, unless you can play the float and get the thing paid off. But if you're going to use them in the manner they hope you use them in the fact of carrying a huge balance, yeah, they're more than happy to give you all those cards. Determine the cost of credit by calculating the interest rate, truth in lending laws, and finance charges. So, truth in lending laws, I mean, the government has taken some steps to try to help you out, but there's certain things, certain those real expensive loans, rent to own centers and things like that don't really fall within those guidelines and can be hugely expensive. APR is the annual percentage rate, so most people are used to that, and it allows you to kind of compare apples to apples in terms of credit, because now you're looking at an annualized rate, and it allows you to compare and shop. So term versus interest cost, longer loans, lower payments, but more total interest. If you see sometimes, like especially when you're buying a house, the total amount you will pay, because that's going to be in there in those HUD statements, and you need to get those a couple 3 days ahead of time. That's not something they're supposed to throw on you at closing time. I mean, there's laws that protect you in that manner. But anyway, if you look at those, you will absolutely be shocked when you realize the total interest you're paying. But again, what's that house going to be worth, 30 years from now? Most mortgages are 30 years. In Spain, when I was there, they were doing 60-year mortgages. It's pretty sad. You have a child, welcome to the family. Here's your mortgage, and especially, well, it's not funny, but those people's mortgages now, their market went horribly wrong, and yeah, huge turmoil over there. But anyway, over here it's not as bad, especially in Alaska. It's even more stable, so that's good. Anyway, some ways to reduce lenders' risk and interest rate. Yeah, collateral, large down payment, shorter loan term. When I bought a house in Germany, and I wanted to do it over 10 years, and I put 1/3 down, and yeah, I got a good interest rate. You can also get even a better interest rate by doing a variable interest rate. But, again, that seemed like a smart thing to do a few years ago. Right now, I would really think that one through. When you do a variable or balloon, that may not be, what they mean in that is the interest rate is tied to something, usually the LIBOR, anyway, London based interest rate, and it can go up and index over years. And anyway, if you get in a situation like that and inflation goes up, you can find yourself in a position where you flat can't pay the mortgage. So that's kind of scary. If it's a 5-year, 10-year thing, maybe you can get by. But if you're locking yourself into some sort of variable interest rate for a longer term, yeah, anyway, everything's based upon risk, but they will give you a much lower interest rate. I had one of those in Spain, which was already risky enough, but I was paying less than 3% interest. So worked out, but it's a little danger. Simple interest, so interest, principal, rate, time, not too much there. It's just math, but the compounding part gets a little more complex, and that's when people either use the charts or they use a calculator. Simple interest on a declining balance, that's the interest you paid only on the amount of the original principal, not yet repaid. So the amount of interest is going to go down since the balance is declining, which is nice for you. Add on interest, this is interest calculated on the full amount. So again, I don't want to read you the slides, but there's different ways to calculate interest, and it's divided by the number of payments to be made. And then adjusted balance. Finance charges calculated after payments made in the billing period have been subtracted. So, again, this is all that nasty paperwork that comes with any credit card or any sort of financing option you choose. But it's, there's different ways of doing it. But what you're looking for, a lot of times, are the government forms, the truth in lending type forms that have to be laid out in a standardized format so that you can pick them up and you can compare them to other loans that you might be contemplating, and then that way you know exactly what you're up against. And again, the penalties for a lender not to comply with any of that truth in lending stuff. In real estate, it's it could cost them his license, or you'd have recourse in court, and used car dealers, same thing. Cost of open-ended credit. So open-ended is like a credit card, right? Where you, as opposed to a mortgage where you have 30 years and it's done. This is one where it's a credit card, and you're gonna what you're used to in terms of balances during the billing period, and then total number of days in the billing period, and then the interest rates. So if you can see that last bullet, but are included if you carry over the balance. That's why what you want to strive for. And again, I know it's not a perfect world. You'd all want to carry zero balances if you could, but if you can get there, when you get there, that's how you get to use the credit card without paying interest rates or interest. 2-cycle average, may include or exclude new purchases, and creditors use average daily balance. So anyway, not used since 2009, so not a huge issue. Previous balance method. So this one, if you look at the example, it's a little easier to figure. Monthly rate of 1.5%. Previous balance was 400, payments 300. Finance charge is $6 based on that $400. So. Okay, so this is a risk for the borrower. If inflation's running away, believe it or not, having a loan out there is not necessarily a bad thing, because you're paying back with dollars that aren't worth as much. Again, if we're talking a house or something, and you're looking at these payments, going, oh man, I'm going to be paying $2,000 a month for 30 years. Well, guess what? 30 years out from now, $2,000 is not much. I mean, I remember my parents had a decent house, and their mortgage payment at the end was like still $133, which seemed like a lot when they started, but by the time they finished, it wasn't much. And then interest paid on consumer credit is not tax deductible. Again, that changed probably before, right around most of the time you folks were born even. But anyway, it used to be, and the credit card companies fought to keep it a tax deductible item, but it is not. Mortgage interest is. So that's the huge deal. If you've got to finance something and you can put it on a home equity loan that is tax deductible, that behooves you. Minimum payment, this is just the minimum to keep them off your back. And then early repayment on certain types of loans, this is the rule of 78s. It does favor the lender. There's different ways of paying interest, and when you look at a mortgage statement on your house, for example, there should be a breakdown in terms of how much principal and interest you're paying. And at first, you're paying pretty much all interest and then a little bit of principal. Towards the end of the loan, it reverses. But in Europe, they use what they call the French method, and it's more balanced. So it is a flexible item in a loan, and it's something you have to be cognizant of before you sign up on the loan. The credit insurance, these folks will offer you this free life insurance, as a big benefit to you. Well, it's not really going to help you. You aren't going to be around. It's just going to make sure that their loan is paid off if you die. So, but it is good if you've got a family, and at least they won't have to deal with the mortgage. But the bank is whatever their primary interest is that that loan gets taken care of. Credit Card Accountability Act. This was that again in 2009. They talked about that one credit card method that was taken out. This again is good for you. These teaser rates must be 6 months. 21 days before payment is due. All these things. This isn't going to affect the good banks. This is going to affect kind of the scumbags out there that are trying to rip you off. Most banks would not, engage in any of these other practices. It's just like I say, some of the other folks who had some abuses in the past. Statements, penalties for limits or for over the limit fees. Under 21 without a cosigner. Again, you don't want to that young in life give you a credit card. I don't know. One of the best ways to keep these guys from sending you all these credit card applications, at least when I was young and in college, I applied for one and they said, they saw how shockingly little I made, and they quit sending me all that junk mail anymore. So you guys will probably qualify, though. I know most of you all have some sort of employment. Develop a plan to manage your debts. So notify creditors who can't make a payment. Yeah, ignoring folks will not work. If you get a hold of people early, you say, okay, this is what's happened. And especially if it's a medical thing, you lose your job or something. But stiff arming them, they want their money, obviously. But if you go bankrupt, they get even less of their money. So they're actually going to be fairly helpful. And once they farm it out to a collection agency, now you're dealing with a whole different group of folks who are working on a percentage, and the company may have just signed off this loan. So you definitely want to talk to the primary creditor while you still can before they farm it off to some collection agency if you end up in that sort of situation. Fair debt collection practices. Yep, they have certain requirements again, but primarily about giving you notice. So again, if you talk to them, they are interested in working something out. They know, somebody without a job cannot, pay the loan back, but in the future, if you communicate with each other, they may get their money back. Reasons for debt. Yeah, this is sad. I mean, I know folks who go to the store and, that cheers them up a little bit to go buy some money. For me, running things up on a credit card doesn't do much for me. And kids, yeah, you will get yourself into trouble with, buying. It's harder to say no to children than it is to yourself. So, miscommunication, lack of communication amongst family members. What they're actually saying there is, a lot of times there's a spender and a saver in the family, and they either work things out or they get a divorce. But that's pretty sad. That's what happens. So, warning signs of debt. Yeah, if you're only doing that minimum payment, you have probably got a problem. It's going to get worse, and some of these companies that want to help you, a lot of times they don't necessarily want to help you or say they can help you. If they're advertising on the radio or on the internet and all that other stuff, if they've got an advertising budget, they need to be making some money. There are nonprofit kind of folks out there who will help you, or better, talk to the lender themselves, or even a government agency. But before you go to one of these private companies who's going to help you out, a lot of times that doesn't work. There was a company just yesterday that lost a huge class action lawsuit and is having to pay back, but not nearly. Everybody of the people who were involved in this thing, they each paid nearly $1,000, $995 each to get their credit cards resolved, and most of them got nothing, just another $995 on their credit card. So stay away from that. Yeah, you can only use your savings for so long. Borrowing money to pay old debts, going over your credit limit, being denied credit. This is, again, the savings that you put away, just a small amount off of your check every month will hopefully, prevent you from from getting in this situation. You know, you need to have some sort of rainy day fund or access to credit, or maybe even some liquid assets. You know, uh, things that are difficult to get rid of are going to be a problem. But you know, for me, I've got some Bobcat tractors. Those things are like money. People are always offering to buy those things, so that's almost like money in the bank. But again, probably not considered a liquid asset. But I've got 3 or 4 now. So, putting off medical dental visits before, yeah, I'm not even going to go there with the healthcare thing. What a mess. So we don't know what's going to happen with that, but it's certainly not going to be what it looks like right now. We'll have to wait and see on that one. Evaluate private and government sources that can assist you. So, again, you know, do not go to one of these private, you know, debt consolidator folks that, you know, offer probably no service, but certainly will tack another bill on your credit card. So there are some agencies that will do it, you know, consumer credit counseling, nonprofit, and this is supported by the banks, you know, those folks. So this is actually really the lenders themselves, you know, realizing that the best way to get their money is, you know, by getting people to plan and be fairly responsible. And also, once you go into bankruptcy, it seems like an early or an easy answer, but a lot of times you end up in just much worse shape. And it punishes the banks. The banks don't like it. And then what do? They raise interest rates again on other credit card members to cover their losses for people who declare bankruptcy. Universities, county extensions, credit unions, yep, all kinds of different folks. ConsumerCredit.com. Anyway, what you want to make sure, the whole notion of a nonprofit is, you know, if you're like me, you know, I don't get it. You know, there's so many nonprofits out there, and you hear some of their executives are making $1 million a year, like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. Those are nonprofits, which is kind of weird. But anyway, these guys are nonprofit credit counselors who can help you out. And bankruptcy again is a last resort. So if you declare bankruptcy, it doesn't, you know, just erase all your problems and make everything go away. What they do is, you know, back in whatever time they had debtor prisons. You know, people would actually get so far in debt where they'd go to prison because they didn't have the money to pay their bills. So that's one extreme. In bankruptcy, where you could just walk in and erase everything, would be another extreme. But that type of bankruptcy doesn't really exist. You don't get to just walk away from that. The court gets involved, and the two different types of bankruptcies that people are normally familiar with, they have different actions. So we'll look at that. Women account for 36% of bankruptcies. So I guess that's good on women. Obviously, if they're 50%, they're only doing 36%. But anyway, 2 million declared bankruptcy in 2005. It'd be interesting to see what those statistics were in 2007, 2008, and Bankruptcy Abuse and Prevention Act of 2005. Again, that's an act to prevent people from using it as a quick tool. Chapter 7. Okay, so what's going to happen in Chapter 7 is you're going to list your assets and your liabilities, and many of, but not all of the debts are forgiven. So student loans, you will be paying those still. But a lot of those other debts will go away. But all the assets, you know, you say you got this or that, they're going to come take them. I mean, they can sell them. Certain assets can be kept, but again, you know, what you're looking for is a fresh start. But it's not necessarily going to be quite so fresh, because try and get a loan, try and get anything done for, you know, the 7 years or so after a bankruptcy. And again, there's, you know, it's a reflection on your character in terms of say, a security clearance or some sort of government work, or many of those things. A bankruptcy will show up. You know, have you ever declared bankruptcy is a common question on most job applications. So again, it could have other implications. So a lot of these things, you can see the commercial folks, commercial lenders are going to take a hit. Unsecured loans, so that means something without any collateral. Um, Hospital, physician bills, and a lot of times good people get into bad situations because they have these hospital bills. Um, Now they're going to have those insurance bills, but whatever, it's still going to be huge bills. Um, Certain taxes. Oh, so again, the government is still going to get their money. Child support and alimony. Yeah, everybody would declare bankruptcy if they could get out of paying child support and alimony because they're just angry. But that obviously they've figured that one out. That will not work. Educational loans, government loans will not work, or debts from willful malicious acts. So this was this act in 2005. So just sort of straighten things out for everybody. Um, Credit counseling, instructional courses. What they're trying to do is prevent repeat bankruptcy. People who get in this situation once, you aren't supposed to show up again in a few years declaring bankruptcy again. Although that'd be tougher because it's going to be tough to get a loan to get yourself in that position. Okay, chapter 13. This is, more reasonable in terms of you can probably keep most of your assets, but you're going to have to come up with a plan to take care of them. So, you're not a basket case. You got a regular income, so there is some hope. You fit within that, those limits, more than 250, but up to of unsecured debt, and then or can't have more than 250 in unsecured debt, or 750 in secured debt, and you've got a trustee involved. So, you've got a person to work with to kind of make some decisions for you, since you've demonstrated to the court that you're not so good at that. Anyway, court may allow you to keep property and pay less than half the debts. So it is a way to get out from under those sorts of debts, and especially if it's a medical issue, and you whatever. Again, good people getting into bad situations. This is a way for you to kind of move on, because there is some hope, and you can feel a little bit better about yourself because you're paying most of the debts. But again, you don't want to crush your entire life because you ran into some financial difficulties that may not have been entirely your own doing. So that was chapter 7. So kind of quick on that, but if you have any questions, like on the Rule of 78 and stuff, it's a little interesting, and it's adopted in most states, so you might want to check on that. I probably won't have too much on the test on that, but again, the bankruptcies, if you get in that situation, it's again, try to go to some sort of nonprofit or somebody other than a sleazy lawyer guy who's you're going to be paying a couple $250 an hour, and anyway, it can get ugly very fast. Okay, so consumer purchasing strategies and legal protection. What we're talking about here is actually, buying stuff. Strategies for consumer buying, consumer problems. We could spend all night on this, and most of you are probably pretty good shoppers, basically, is what this chapter talks about. Strategies for effective consumer buying and the trade-offs. Paying a higher price over time by using credit cards to buy items you need now, or buying unknown, possibly poor quality brands that are less expensive. I don't actually agree with, a lot of times there's only so many factories, in terms of fuel, for example. There's a lot of different gas stations, but there's not that many different refineries. You'll see the truck make several stops on the way back to the refinery. So sometimes the brands don't necessarily matter that much. And there's trade-offs when buying. Yeah, you can selecting brands that may be difficult to service or repair, order in mail, taking time. I mean, this is all we kind of, whenever we buy something, we kind of have all these things in our mind because we've had either good or bad experiences trying to get things fixed that or from some obscure brand. But yet again, if you can't afford um, the top of the line name brand, maybe you can find one that's similar and you won't have to go without. So factors that consumer purchases, economic, social, personal. So the economic, obviously all the tax rates, the regulations in there, and the social, lifestyle, culture, all of that kind of fuzzy stuff, and then the personal factors, income, education, etc. But those all lead to what's going to happen. Practical purchasing strategy, yeah. Timing purchases, be aware the price varies with the time of year. The extreme on this would be Christmas stuff. Obviously, if you're in the market for Christmas lights and you got enough to get by this year, take that same, say, $100 you're going to spend on Christmas lights. If you go out there, a day before Christmas, a day after Christmas, you could clean up. I mean, they're like 10%. But again, you don't want to ruin this year's Christmas. So a little pre-planning. But this happens with just about everything. I would imagine with PFDs coming out this week, prices may be a little higher on some of the car lots. They may say they're having some deals, but again, they're going to have so much volume coming through the door that they can probably, meet their quotas without much trouble. Store selection, choice of retailer, cooperatives, non-profit organizations. Yeah, we don't have so many of the cooperatives. Some folks, I guess, in the military, would go to the exchanges, but Costco and Sam's Club, they really wouldn't fall into those categories. And REI, I don't see the whole cooperative thing reflected in lower prices. So anyway, not much of a thing. Brand comparisons, again, I'm talking to people who are probably far more adept at shopping. I mean, if you want to go buy a Bobcat, like I say, I can, I know everything about those, but in terms of clothes and brand comparisons, label information, again, it depends on what you're purchasing. We all know about store brands versus national brands. If you're buying, I don't know, soup or something, you can try the store brand. If it's just as good as the other, then why not? Again, this is stuff that you're probably used to throughout the course of your life. Unit pricing, just about every store does this in terms of grocery stores, and it is kind of unusual. If you look at the unit pricing, it should be you buy the bigger box, you get a better price per unit, but there's exceptions. So anyway, a quick scan of that. Often I'll go with one of my daughters, and I've taught them to look, and they'll see some pretty drastic measurements changes. Another thing too on electronics and stuff, you go into, say, Best Buy to buy an HDMI cable, and it may be $15-20. I bought a 50-foot HDMI cable via the Chinese folks off eBay for $12. So anyway, that's where those folks make their money on a lot of those consumer electronics places, on the accessories. And again, this is stuff you figure out. Again, too, if you're doing this too, online pricing, most places will match online prices. Like if you do happen to shop at Best Buy, you can generally save at least 10% by having your smartphone with you, looking up their product on their online store, and they'll match the online price. So again, you can get kind of crazy with this. I've got a scanner on my smartphone where you can scan in the UPC code, and it'll give me the price for all the stores in the area. So it's usually pretty comparable, but anyway, just something you can do based on technology. The warranty issue, yeah, you gotta wonder sometimes. They'll give you a warranty, but they want the original packaging, they want this or that, or they want you to send it back to the manufacturer. If you're going to follow through with that, that's great. But most of the time, if somebody's offering you a good warranty, it probably means it's a good product. But in terms of actually getting that warranty executed, it's often very difficult. And the extended warranties, very often, are not a good deal at all. In real estate, when I was an agent, they always had us pressing the extended warranties, and I had to execute one of those myself. My well pump went out, and yeah, the list of things that they did not cover, like any reason that pump would break, like rust, corrosion, wiring, just about any common cause, was not covered. We did get it, my particular problem, covered, but it only covered 1/3 of it. So, you know, anyway, when I'm selling a home to folks and they think they're buying some peace of mind, anyway, I would be honest with them and say, yeah, might not be as good a deal as you think it is, because it's often hard to get those folks to pay off. So, consumer purchases, motor vehicles, the process. So, again, cars are such a horrible investment, and I really do not like going to the dealer and dealing with all that stuff. So I'm one of these folks who will basically kind of have my mind made up on what I want before I go there and what the price is, and I've compared everything, and if I do have to go to a dealership, I'm just going in there to do the final deal. So anyway, if you're one of those people who likes to go to car lots and likes to hang out and talk and haggle and all that, yeah, by all means, but that's not for me. And I tend not to, very rarely do I buy, I'll usually buy new trucks once in a while, but I tend to keep them, and they never go back to the dealer ever. So that's, a lot of that was just from being overseas, and the businesses over there, we could not get services. So anyway, the more armed you are, though, with information, the better off you are. And again, it's unfortunate we don't have a CarMax or one of those, big sort of high volume folks that are compete strictly on price, but that may come at some point. That is their cycle, though, for buying a motor vehicle, if you care to go through that. But just be aware of the sort of the scams, sort of the the practices, whether it's the interest rate that's going to be very low, but now they won't come down on the price, or maybe they'll do the thing where they'll offer you a tremendous amount of money for the trade-in. And anyway, we've all kind of been there. If you bought a car, there's quite a bit involved in that process. Again, they're just going to go through each one of these steps. Pre-shopping activities, information gathering. Again, the best way to stay out of trouble here is know what you want before you actually show up, so that you can't get talked into some sort of emotional process where they start talking about monthly payments, and for a few dollars more you can get this or get that, and you kind of lose track of the final price. That's a common tactic too. Again, they mentioned CarMax, Carfax. That just gives you details whether the car's been, perhaps like on a salvage title where it's been wrecked and kind of pieced back together, and you're buying a, kind of half a car. Not good as well. Leasing an automobile, very few times does this make sense for people in private use. Business type sense, this is more of a personal finance course, but in a business sense, if you're leasing it under your business, that can work out for you. But as a personal finance, as a consumer leasing a car, not usually the way to go. Does keep you in a new car, though, if that's your goal. Negotiation for cars, yeah, just a slimy process. And Kelley Blue Book and Edmunds and these other folks, they have a tough time. I mean, this is what makes dealing in used cars and used tractors, anything up here in Alaska pretty profitable, because there's such a disparity in the prices paid, and it's trying to figure out the true market value of a vehicle up here is nearly impossible, and you see the extremes. So, yeah, try and arm yourself, but again, a useful thing is to find out what the bank will loan on it, because that's, they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is, rather than just making a statement based upon one of these Kelley Blue Book or Edmunds. If you go to a bank, even if you aren't going to get a loan, they can give you the loan value if you ask them, and that a lot of times is more accurate, and it's going to be probably a little bit more or a little bit lower than what you can actually get the car for, but they're concerned with the collateral value of that car, and you should be as well. They want to know what to do if they have to resell that car, if they get stuck with it. So, purchase price, financing alternatives. Yep. It's very tough to buy a new car and not be upside down. That's pretty much going to happen for the first couple of years after you have that car, just because they depreciate so much. If you can buy a car that's maybe just a couple years old, that's great. Rental cars, not so much. I had a rental car this weekend, nothing out accelerates a rental car. No gas too cheap, no curb too high. I mean, rental cars get abused. So, and the code words for that are executive cars, corporate cars, whatever. You're buying an old rental car that's probably been abused. So, again, it can be dangerous. Rebates, low interest financing. Again, be aware that a lot of times, there may be a balance there. When they're offering the low interest rate, they may not dicker with the price. So, you can also use a third party, like my bank, for example, has a buying service, and a lot of times, credit unions, big banks will have some sort of direct buying service where you can get that done. Or if you want to get the low interest loan, if you can secure that through your bank, again, they aren't going to go zero interest because they still have to make some money. But if you go in there as a cash buyer into the dealer, then you can negotiate for price. Lemon laws, yeah, again, difficult to enforce. Lemon laws cover vehicles that you buy, primarily used cars or new cars as well. They have to, go into the shop so many times for the same problem, and then you have some legal recourse against them. A good mechanic is helpful. I fixed cars when I was in high school, and I tell you the truth, I was not qualified to be fixing cars. First brake job I ever did was on a customer's, and it's pretty scary for that guy and for me as well. So, but that customer, he didn't get any discount on the price. It was a learning experience for me, and I was competent and got it done. But just the same, be aware when you go to a large service center. It's better to have a personal mechanic if you can find one, as opposed to a part switcher. So very few mechanics are still out there. There's a lot of people who just change parts out because there's more money to be made because you get a commission on all the parts you sell. So anyway, we could talk about that for days as well. Resolving consumer complaints. So let's say you get in a problem, with the vehicle. Vehicles are kind of the worst case because they're so hard, especially on a used car. First, get educated, know what your legal options are. If there was some sort of short-term warranty, make sure you know what that is. Often it'll be like a powertrain warranty, which is defined as not a whole lot. So, if the door falls off, well, that's not the powertrain. If, the battery goes bad, that wasn't the powertrain. So, powertrain is pretty narrowly defined. Contact the company's main office. You don't want to go in there and argue, mano a mano with the salesman generally. If you've, got the goods on these folks, you may want to escalate it a bit, and then the consumer agency, Better Business Bureau, other folks, and then the legal action. If you end up, the first thing that's going to happen though, let's say you go to small claims court on some matter, the judge there is going to want proof of you pursuing this thing. And so that's why emails are right. In person, verbally is pretty much not the way you want to go because it doesn't leave any record. If you can do this in writing by letter, it takes a little longer, but it leaves a clear record and it kind of shows them you're serious. So anyway, if this thing does end up in litigation, the fact that you have documentation that you tried to get this resolved, at a reasonable level will greatly favor you. Also, generally when you're signing contracts, because litigation, legal costs can get so expensive, they'll usually have you agree to some sort of mitigation or arbitration, which, again, those folks are supposed to be neutral, but it means that, you have to go to a mediator, typically one that they've chosen, to, argue out this matter, and it won't end up in court. So, identify the steps to return. So, return a place of purchase, main office, obtain assistance from consumer agency. So, again, the difference between mediation and arbitration. The mediation, that guy's just there to help you talk it through, get it done. Mediators, charge a certain amount for their services, but it's not binding. If you agree to arbitration, it's usually called binding arbitration because the decision is binding. They're going to hear both sides, and they're like sort of a pseudo judge. So when you do agree to arbitration, you've agreed that this matter is not going to end up in court. And then the state consumer protection, probably pretty good. If you're in a state like, let's say, California and New York, where they're just overwhelmed with folks. But here in Alaska, you could probably get a bit of personal attention. And it's, small enough numbers-wise where, a dealer that really is abusing the system he doesn't want that kind of name for himself. Federal agencies, they do exist. But, again, most of these consumer issues are handled at the state, local level. So the legal alternatives, small claims court, class action, using a lawyer. So the deals with class action or small claims is not a bad way to go. There's no lawyers involved. It's easy, and if you have things documented and, you're fairly persuasive, you can prevail. So it's not that you're going to use it as just a blind threat, but if you have things, your ducks lined up, and you're going to go to small claims court, the company may often just settle just to avoid that process. Class action suits, this is kind of a hobby in itself. This is where lawyers get involved. This is a whole bunch of folks, a class, who are going to have all been wrong. They all have this common problem, and so rather than go individually against a company, for example, they'll get together in a class, and you can be part of the class. You can opt out of the class. And probably a lot of you have gotten letters, saying that there's a class action lawsuit, and they want to know whether you want to be a part of it. And then a regular lawyer. Lawyers are about $250 an hour, so keep that in mind. If it's just a small deal, small claims court is the way you want to go. If it's a existing problem or going to be a big problem, a quick letter from a lawyer, again, shows some intent that you're willing to go the extra mile to get this thing resolved. And people may just say, I don't want to mess with this guy, and agree to your terms, especially if you're in the right. And then legal aid, prepaid legal services. I have the option with one of the firms I work with that, to have prepaid legal services, but they don't cover any of the things that I would typically be involved in, so I've never opted for them. And then personal consumer protection. Yeah. Again, when you're signing contracts, often read through them, and you will see that you're often agreeing to mediation or binding arbitration, just because it's a fairly litigious society, and they realize the expense, and they don't want to get involved in it. And also, reputable companies. there's so many, especially like if you're dealing with Craigslist and you don't know what you're doing. I mean, people don't even bother to steal stuff anymore to sell it. They sell stuff they don't even have. So I mean, again, I could go through example after example of deals that were too good to be true, and they are. So be very, very careful. And a lot of this has to do with people, wanting you to wire them money, um, or when somebody's trying to buy something from you, and you need to send them money for some strange reason to, cover this unusual shipping thing or just get the. Anyway, it's a scam. So read those disclaimers, the warnings about using Western Union and all the rest of the things, because there are people out there who will rip you off. All right. So, any questions about what we talked about tonight? Um, like I say, if anybody has any personal issues with car buying stuff, or wants to know more about scams, I mean, it's I could go into detail with you, but probably the general audience probably doesn't care that much. But believe me, I've not attempted to buy cars, but inquired into vehicles. Just for example, a big block Corvette that's worth probably about $50,000. It was being sold for $12,500, and I asked the guy for the VIN number, and turns out that car was in another guy's garage. It was not for sale. It was just, and with the internet now, the crime can go, worldwide. You may be dealing with somebody from a far off land, so be very, very careful. But I don't want to drag into that. Other issues, like I say, next week I'll probably do the practice test type thing on just a separate thing to make it fairly concise. But like I say, I'll have a copy of your upcoming exam in front of me, and I'll just kind of review it just to make sure that there's no gaps in knowledge, that you understand the areas we're going to be going through. Because it's, I'm not necessarily, I'm not teaching you the test, but I do want you to know the areas that are fair game and also important. There's huge test banks full of questions that I have to choose from, and so I try to choose questions that are relevant and important concepts that you need to understand. So that'll be well worth your time. Other than that, send me an email if you've got any questions, and we'll look forward to it. The project, I got really no other comments back. I'm sure people are going to have want some clarification on certain issues, but until those emails start rolling in, until people start working on the project, I really won't know what those are. But I'll try and put those back out in the announcements. I think the project, though, will be a good opportunity to allow you to come up with a plan, and also wrap up the rest of your homework for the rest of the term into one project, so there won't be these weekly assignments. So good luck and have a good week.